There was a time when television had the power to stop the nation in its tracks, when the whole country would gather around their television sets to experience something at exactly the same time. Big moments weren't just watched, they were felt together, live and unmissable. Whether it was a royal event, a football match, or a major TV premiere or finale, certain broadcasts carried a kind of electricity that pulsed through living rooms up and down the country. And in the late 1990s, a brand new quiz show managed to tap into that magic, going on to become one of the greatest British quiz shows of all time. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Each week, ordinary members of the public would have the chance to win the largest cash prize ever awarded on a television game show, a whopping £1 million. And all you had to do to win was to get yourself into the hot seat via the fastest finger first, and then answer 15 questions in a row correctly to walk away with the jackpot. It wasn't just the money that hooked audiences right from the start, it was the whole package. The dramatic lighting, the intense music, the tension-filled circular stage, and of course the incredible Chris Tarrant, whose calm but authoritative hosting style kept the whole nation on the edge of their seats. The show was unlike anything British audiences had ever seen on primetime TV, becoming a cultural juggernaut almost overnight. And in this episode of the 90s Rewind, we're heading back to September of 1998 to revisit the debut episode of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, taking a brief look at the show's origins, reliving that very first night, and discussing how the show evolved over the years. If you're a fan of classic TV deep dives like this, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel and ensures you won't miss out on future episodes. So let's fire up the studio lights, cue the dramatic soundtrack, and rewind the tape to where it all began. The debut episode of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Before we dive into the very first broadcast of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, let's take a look at the show's origins. The format was created by the trio of David Briggs, Stephen Knight, and Mike Whitehill, all of whom had considerable experience in television and broadcasting leading up to their creation of the show. David Briggs led the show's development, having produced Chris Tarrant's radio show on Capital Radio, where he came up with a number of games and quizzes. One game in particular, called Double or Quits, appears to be the original inspiration for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Double or Quits would see callers to the radio station start with £1 and they could double their money with every question they got right. Briggs told Tarrant over lunch one day that he was thinking of turning the format into a TV game show, and the initial idea was born. The general premise was to have just one contestant at a time answering questions, with a cash prize increasing after each question was answered correctly. Contestants would be able to see the next question and the possible answers, but could pull out at any time and take what they had already won. To help them out, contestants would be given 3 lifelines: 50-50, ask the audience, and phone a friend. It sounds like such a simple idea, but that was part of the show's genius. There were no complicated rules or difficult challenges to complete, simply answer the questions and the money is yours. The working title of the show was Cash Mountain, but ITV Director of Programs David Liddeman decided instead to use the title of the song Who Wants to Be a Millionaire from the 1956 movie High Society as the show's title.
Who wants to be a millionaire?
I don't.
High Society is a great movie, by the way. I highly recommend checking it out if you've never seen it. After being rejected by various people in the industry, the show eventually found its home on ITV, and the show went into pre-production. Briggs naturally chose Chris Tarrant for the role of host, and a pilot episode of the show was filmed in July of 1998. Various clips of this pilot have surfaced, showing that while the show had the same look and feel as the regular series, the theme music was very, very different. The pilot also featured a slightly different prize structure, with the first 5 questions going from £1 to £10, £100, £500 and then £1,000. After this first pilot, producer Paul Smith said that the show needed a little more menace, and composers Keith Strachan and his son Matthew were given 24 hours to rewrite the music. And this is where we got that iconic music that is still used to this day. A second pilot was filmed shortly thereafter, and the show was greenlit for a first series of 11 episodes. Let's now go all the way back to September of 1998 to relive the debut broadcast of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. The very first episode of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was broadcast on Friday, September 4th, 1998, occupying the 8 p.m. time slot. The show was publicized heavily in the lead up to its debut. Never before had there been such a big prize on a game show, and the country was certainly intrigued about this brand new show. The show starts with a cold open from Chris telling us about the £1 million jackpot before we see those iconic opening titles and theme music for the first time. We meet our first 10 contestants and then go straight into the first fastest finger first question, which is, what is the smallest unit of a computer's memory? A byte, dot, chip, or bit? A relatively easy question this, certainly for those familiar with computers. The answer is bit, and our first contestant in the hot seat is Graham Elwell, who answered the question in just 0.69 seconds.
Graham is now just 15 questions away from winning £1 million. You're looking ever so cool and composed, and I know you're not.
From Series 2, the fastest finger first round would change to the familiar ordering question, where each of the 4 answers have to be put into a particular order. But during this first series, it was a simple multiple choice question, with the fastest to answer getting into the hot seat. Also, I loved these early series when the £1 million in cash was sitting right between the contestant and Chris. I wish they hadn't gotten rid of that. We learn that Graham is 27 and a drama student at the Webber Douglas Academy in London, and he says if he wins tonight, he's just going to blow the lot. For me, if I won £1 million, I would most certainly buy a house. We all know how expensive those are these days. What about you? What would you do if you won £1 million? Chris then explains the rules, and it's on with the very first game of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Okay, let's play.
As always, the first 5 questions are relatively straightforward, and Graham is able to breeze through them no problem. The first question is obviously A, beak. Question 2 is turn, which can go before the words table, coat, and style to create new words. Question 3 is Wellington for Wellington boots. Question 4 is darts, although those unfamiliar with the sport may have struggled with this one. And the £1,000 question asks which actor starred in Scent of a Woman, and the answer is Al Pacino. With those answers, Graham has successfully reached the first milestone of £1,000 and is now guaranteed not to go home empty-handed. The £2,000 question is what is the more common name for a lexicon? Slightly trickier than the previous questions, but still not enough to trip up our Graham.
Here's our Graham,
who confidently answers C, dictionary. Next, for £4,000, the question asks which other sport goes alongside cross-country skiing to complete the biathlon. Again, one of those questions that if you just weren't familiar with winter sports, you would probably have to use a lifeline on, but Graham seems to know the answer is rifle shooting, and it's correct. 7 questions in, and Graham is cruising.
You've now got £4,000.
Question 8 is another relatively easy one. Obviously the answer is C, Volkswagen, and Graham is able to reach £8,000 without using a single lifeline. I've certainly seen £4,000 and £8,000 questions that are way harder than this, so it makes me think perhaps the show wanted the first contestant to get up to at least £32,000 in order to essentially show off the show's format and build the drama right from the start. For £16,000, Graham is asked what form of entertainment Harry Houdini was famous for. Perhaps one of the most famous people to have ever lived, Harry Houdini was of course famous for his incredible feats of escapology, and Graham reaches the £16,000 mark.
You've now got 16.
The £32,000 question next, and a chance for Graham to reach another milestone, guaranteeing him at least that amount no matter what. And the question is one that for me isn't immediately obvious. In the film Witness, Harrison Ford hides out among which religious group? I haven't actually seen this movie, so would have definitely had to use a lifeline here, but Graham thinks he knows the answer is the Amish and goes for it.
You can find out what happens in a couple of minutes.
When we return from our commercial break, we learn that indeed Graham was correct and he has now reached that crucial £32,000 milestone with all of his lifelines remaining. But as we all know, this is where it gets really tense. Question 11 asks which was the first stately home to open its doors to the public. I have absolutely no idea what the answer is, and Graham has an inkling but decides to use his 50-50.
Computer, please take away 2 wrong answers.
I would have maybe gone for Blenheim Palace here, but Graham goes for Wilton House, and it's correct for £64,000.
You've now got 64.
The tension in the studio is increasing minute by minute, and question 13 is a cracker. Which country is sandwiched between Ghana and Benin? Togo, Equatorial Guinea, Côte d'Ivoire, or Gabon? As a huge fan and player of the game GeoGuessr, I knew this immediately to be Togo. But Graham doesn't look confident at all and decides to use his phone a friend, opting to call his grandfather. In these early series, an actual phone was used to call the phone a friend, something that would be dropped in later series, but I quite liked this little quirk. Unfortunately, Graham's granddad has no idea what the answer is and isn't even able to make a guess before the 30 seconds run out. So Graham decides there and then to end his run and take home £64,000. I always wondered why he didn't use his final lifeline Ask the Audience here. It would have made sense to just use it and see what happens, perhaps they would have known, but they may have all gone for something completely wrong and could have forced Graham into going for the wrong answer. So it makes sense to just take the money and run. Our first contestant goes home with a whopping £64,000. No hanging about, it's straight into the next fastest finger first question, which asks which singer's only UK #1 was Wherever I Lay My Hat in 1983. The answer is of course Paul Young, classic song, and Rachel DaCosta got it right the fastest in 0.69 seconds. Amazingly, the exact same time it took Graham to get his question right earlier. Rachel takes the hot seat as the second ever contestant in the show's history. Chris and Rachel are able to get through the first 4 questions to £500 before we hear the klaxon signaling the end of the show. Rachel will continue tomorrow night. We get a rundown of the next 10 contestants who will take the fastest finger first seats in the next episode, and this very first broadcast of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire comes to an end. Within just a few episodes, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire became the talk of the country and overnight became the most exciting, unmissable television show in the UK. The show broadcast blocks of episodes every few months for the first few years, eventually settling on a schedule of 2 series per year, one in the first half of the year and one in the second half. What made the show so compelling was that wait for someone to finally win the £1 million. And that moment would come on November 20th, 2000, when Judith Keppel became the first contestant to win the show's top prize. She would later go on to be one of the experts on eggheads from 2003 until her retirement in 2022. Only 5 other contestants have won the £1 million, including David Edwards in April of 2001, Robert Bridges in September of the same year, Pat Gibson in April of 2004, who also went on to join Eggheads, my favourite Ingram Wilcox, who won the $1 million in September of 2006, and finally Donald Fear on September 11th, 2020. We of course can't also forget Charles Ingram, who won the £1 million in September of 2001, but was subsequently found to have cheated and his prize wasn't paid out. I'll definitely be covering that scandal at some point in the future. The show maintained the exact same structure from the start all the way until 2007, when a brand new payout structure was introduced, which essentially removed the first 3 questions and altered the way the prize money increased as each question went by. I was never really a big fan of this change, change and was pleased that when the show returned in 2018, the original payout structure was reinstated. The show also experimented with other format changes, including the introduction of a time limit for some questions and new lifelines including Switch, where contestants could change the question they'd received, and Ask the Host, which was introduced in the reboot. Chris Tarrant would go on to host an incredible 30 series of Millionaire from its inception all the way to 2014 and the show's cancellation. Then, when the show returned in 2018, Jeremy Clarkson was brought in as the new host, a role he still holds to this day. I'll admit that I wasn't a fan of Clarkson hosting this show at first, but he's certainly grown on me and has given the show a new lease of life in recent years. While the show is not as popular today as it was in the past, it remains a beloved part of British television history and still manages to draw solid viewing figures during its runs. Its influence is undeniable. It changed the game for quiz shows, inspired countless international versions, and proved that high-stakes, slow-burn television could still captivate a mass audience. Even now, almost 3 decades on from its debut, the familiar lights, music, and tension still have the power to pull you in, and that is a true testament to just how special Who Wants to Be a Millionaire really is. Thanks everyone for watching this episode of the 90s Rewind. I still enjoy watching Millionaire to this day, but there's something captivating about going back and re-watching episodes from the early days, particularly all of the amazing £1 million winners. How do you think you would do on the show? Could you make it all the way to £1 million? Let me know your thoughts and memories in the comments below. Please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you again in the next video.